What's up, everybody? Tara Wellman here, back with another series preview for you on this holiday weekend as the Cardinals head to Miller Park for the second time on the year. Now, the Brewers and the Cardinals are 3-3 in the season series so far, but neither team has held on to home field advantage. The Cardinals won 2 of 3 in Milwaukee, and then the Brewers won 2 of 3 in St. Louis. But the Brewers have a little bit of history on their side heading into this series. They're off to the best 50-game start in team history. Not too shabby. So the Cardinals have their work cut out for them if they want to cut into that 4-game lead that the Brewers currently have over them and the rest of the NL Central. But a lot of things have gone on since we last saw the Brewers. The Cardinals and the Brewers, maybe more than most teams, have shuffled the deck a time or 12. So to sort through all of that and catch up on all things Brewers, I'm happy to welcome back to Birdseeds, Kyle Wisniewski. Well, Kyle, first of all, thanks for joining me for the second time and on this holiday weekend nonetheless. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Always look forward to an opportunity to chat with you and talk a little bit of baseball.
Well, the Brewers are pretty fun to talk about right now, so you've got that going for you. I saw a tweet from you the other day that just basically said, this team is really special. What is it, other than obviously leading the division on Memorial Day weekend, that makes them so special to watch right now?
It just feels like, and there's not really a way to quantify this kind of stuff, but it just feels like there's not any quit in this team. And they've had a lot of, like just in this past series with the Mets, they had 2 games where they came back from deficits of like 3 runs or greater. And they've got 4 or 5 walk-off victories already this season, and they've just been really excellent in close game situations, and the offense has really kind of turned it on here in the last few weeks to pick up the pitching that has been really solid throughout the course of the season. So we're starting to see now, I think, the offense that everybody thought we would kind of see when the season started. Just took everybody a little bit to get going, and now with the way that they've been playing lately and the way that Craig Counsell has kind of been pushing his different buttons, it just feels like there's good things going on this year.
It's interesting that you mentioned Craig Counsell and sort of pushing the right buttons, because it does seem like he's doing things that are a bit unconventional as far as how he's trying to manipulate the pieces that he has to create the best possible team. And it seems to be working so far. What has been the most impressive part of how Craig Counsell has taken all of these, at times it seems like kind of mismatched pieces, and turned them into this machine that's winning so many games?
I think the most interesting thing and the most impressive thing that Counsell has been able to do this year has been the way that he's managed the pitching staff. And, coming into the season, that was kind of what everybody's biggest worry about the Brewers was were they going to have enough pitching? Specifically, were they going to have enough starting pitching? And I remember, when we talked closer to the beginning of the season, I kind of said that as long as the Brewers starters can get through 5-6 innings or so and give up around 3 or 4 runs, that they should be able to bridge the gap to the bullpen and have the bullpen and the offense be able to pick them up. And so far through the season, that's been pretty much how things have played out. Their rotation right now has like a 4.19 cumulative ERA, which is like number 16 in baseball. So they're right there, right around the middle of the pack. And obviously baseball's number 1 bullpen right now. And Craig Counsell actually had a really interesting interview the other day with Tom Hardricourt from the Journal-Sentinel, and talked about the way that he managed his pitching staff and how the way that the organization looks at it is it's how many outs can you get and how many batters can you face per start versus the old adage of, well, let's get everybody to 100 pitches and that's kind of where we'll pull the plug. Craig Counsell's really been more so focused on matchups and avoiding that dreaded third time through the batting order kind of split. And saw it just the other day in a start with Junior Guerra, was through 6 innings on 72 pitches, had given up only 2 runs, and they pulled him out and turned it over to the bullpen. Guy could have, probably gone another 2 innings at that rate, but Craig Counsell is managing almost on a game-by-game basis to win each game individually. And the way that they've managed their bullpen in shuffling up arms constantly from the minor leagues means that they've been able to avoid, the overusage that everybody's been kind of worried about, and keep these guys fresh throughout the season, while the bullpen itself has managed a pretty large workload. And I think that's been really impressive to watch.
It's so fascinating to me to see something like that. Baseball as a whole is typically very resistant to these sort of newfangled ideas,
right,
and sort of redefining roles, right? Because, most starters in baseball want to be the guy that goes 7 or 8 innings every 5 days. So then you take these starters and tell them, that's great, but you're only going to go 5. And that's just how it is. It seems like a scenario where there could be some resistance to that. And not only from the players, but look, the Cardinals put Jack Flaherty, one of their rookies, out in the 8th inning the other day. He threw 120 pitches to get through 7 2/3. Mind-boggling, but that's actually their plan. They said afterwards, that was our mark, 120 pitches. So to go from that philosophy where they're like, no, he's this durable guy, he wasn't throwing under any stress, he can throw 120 pitches, to the flip side where Craig Counsell's like, you're throwing a shutout on 75 pitches in the 6th inning? Cool, that's great, you did your job, move on. I just think it's a fascinating change of pace, and something that I feel like a lot of teams have sort of talked about, but no one's really been bold enough to do it the way that Counsell has.
Yeah, I would definitely say the way that the Rays have been handling their pitching staff this year has obviously been very interesting to kind of watch, and has raised a lot of eyebrows through the game. But I would think, besides them, I guess I can't really think of a more progressive organization the way that they're handling their pitching right now than the Brewers. And for the most part, it seems like everybody's kind of been buying in. And I guess the only time I can specifically think of any quotes or anything after a game was earlier in the year. Chase Anderson was in a start, and the Brewers at that point had yet to have a starter complete 7 innings at all, which has actually only happened 2 or 3 times, I think, for the team this year. But he was through 6 2/3 shutout innings, had only 87 pitches, and Craig Counsell came out and pulled him, and Chase Anderson after the game was like, well, I definitely wasn't expecting that to happen there, but, Counsell liked the matchup, I guess, so it ended up working out. And I think that if the team wasn't having as much success as they were, it might be a little more resistant to that. But just the fact that everybody seems to be playing at a higher level because of how they're being utilized, I think is helping the team kind of come together and buy into this sort of different and, new philosophy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the Cardinals are in a situation where very shortly they're probably going to have 6, if not 7 guys that should theoretically be starting in the major leagues. So there's been some talk about creative ways to work all of those guys in, whether it's, putting one of those starters technically in the bullpen, but sort of piggybacking starts with some of the young guys so they don't throw as many innings. And the sort of overriding theme is, well, we don't really want Mike Matheny going out there and pulling Alex Reyes in the 6th inning when he's pitching a gem. But the Counsell philosophy is, well, that was his job. He did his job. We can move on and let someone else do their job now, which I think is really interesting. And when you have the kind of bullpen that the Brewers have, when you have Josh Hader and Jeremy Jeffress, when you have some of those guys, you can be a little bit creative and have that sort of confidence in your bullpen. Let's talk a little bit more about that bullpen, because it seems like no matter who fits into what spot, everything's working.
Yeah, and that's been the overriding theme for the Brewers this year. Is everybody just goes out, and Dan Jennings, one of their left-handed relievers the other day, was, a lot of guys have been more used to being in roles in the past, but now that none of us know specifically when or what situation we're going to go into in a game, it kind of keeps everybody on their toes. And the overriding theme is that everybody wants to do their job. And that's after every game, it's like, well, Jeffress came in and did his job, and Jennings came in and did his job, and Hader came in and did his job. And that's kind of what everybody is focused on, regardless of where they're pitching in the game. They're just trying to get outs. And Craig Counsell, I think, has done a really, really good job of convincing these players and getting them to buy in that, outs in the sixth inning are just as important as outs in the ninth inning, depending on the situation of the game. So that's why a guy like Jeremy Jeffress, who has pitched, I want to say, like 25 consecutive scoreless appearances, just tied a Brewers record in his last outing. They kind of refer to him as the starter's closer, because he's been the guy that they've called on a lot in those fifth and sixth innings when, maybe a guy runs into a wall and all of a sudden there's two runners on base and it's a close game in the fifth inning. And Jeremy Jeffress is a lot of times the guy that'll come in and put out that fire. And he's a guy who's been, capital C closer in the past, and getting a guy like that to kind of buy into this sort of mindset and thrive in a role that obviously is different from, what he's been used to in the past is, just another testament to the way that Craig Counsell has been handling this pitching staff this year.
If you had to say who's been better between Josh Hader and Jeremy Jeffress, is it possible to split that somewhere and put one over the other right now?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult because, you look at Jeffress and the way that he's prevented runs. Obviously, he's given up like one earned run all season. And the way that he's getting those outs, I guess, probably doesn't point to that being sustainable, obviously. Doesn't have quite the strikeout rate, and he'll walk a guy here or there. But the way that Hader just has come in and, every outing essentially is just coming in and dominating. He's struck out almost 18 batters per 9 innings this year. I want to say last I saw, of all National League pitchers, he was number 12 overall in strikeouts, and he was the only guy that was a relief pitcher on that list.
It's not too
so
shabby.
It's been just both of these guys. It's just been incredible to watch, and they're getting really strong performances out of other guys too, like Taylor Williams and Dan Jennings, and Matt Albers has kind of been an unsung hero in this bullpen as well. And like I said, it's just everybody coming in and doing their jobs. And I think that as a unit, the way that their mindset is makes them almost better as a unit than it does just as individual pieces.
Now, the last time we talked was right after the Corey Knebel injury. So this time I threw it out on Twitter, told some people to send in some questions. I'm going to throw a few of those at you. One of them had to do with that, and the fact that since Knebel came back, he's struggled a little bit here and there. And the question is, with his struggles and how good Hader has been, is there any temptation to put him in that ninth in a more defined role? I'm guessing no, because of the creativity of Craig Counsell, but at some point you might feel like, okay, if anyone can be that lockdown guy, maybe it's Josh Hader.
Yeah, and Craig Counsell throughout the entire year has kind of downplayed that closer's role. And we saw when Knebel was out, they had 4 or 5 different guys that recorded saves during that 4 or 6 week period or whatever it was. So he's certainly not opposed to going to different guys in that situation depending on what the game dictates. And his quote these last few days has been, the bullpen is better with Corey at the back end of it. So I don't anticipate them making a change from that anytime soon. And if they do want to lock in a guy in that ninth inning sort of role, I definitely don't think that it's going to be Josh Hader. Just the way that they've used him as sort of that bridge has just been so incredibly valuable for the team this year. And I want to say like all but 2 of his appearances have been for more than 1 inning, and he's got 12 appearances so far this season that have spanned at least 2 complete innings. And I want to say right now he's on pace to throw the most 2-inning relief appearances since like Mariano Rivera before he was the Yankees closer. So I mean, we haven't seen a guy used in the way that Josh Hader has been used in 20 years. So I don't think that they're really even considering moving him out of that role at this time. And if it does end up being that they want to get away from Knebel as the closer, I think it'll kind of morph back into that sort of by committee situation that they had before, where we would see a lot of times maybe Hader would come out and start the 8th inning, and if he got through the 8th pretty clean, they would send him back out and maybe have him get a 2 or 2 1/3 inning save, something like that.
Definitely nice to have all of those options when your closer isn't maybe quite as locked down as you expected him to be. Moving on from pitching, although I feel like we could talk about this forever, and I'm sure we'll circle back to it because we do want to talk about this series with the Cardinals specifically. But I'm going to move on to a couple of those other Twitter questions. And this one, Graham asked, "Why did the Brewers demote Arcia?"
Well, I mean, I guess I've always liked Orlando Arcia, and I think that a lot of people, when he first came up to the Brewers, maybe had some unreasonable expectations for him just because they saw that, number 6 overall prospect next to his name or whatever it was when he came up at the very least, he was like a consensus top 10, top 15 prospect in the game. But his profile has never really been built around his offensive game. It's always been built around that outstanding glove and his defensive abilities. And, I mean, we saw plenty of that throughout the course of these first few months of the season. I want to say he's actually he was the number 1 or number 2 player overall in baseball in defensive runs saved when he got demoted. But at the same time, he was hitting 194. His weighted runs created plus was like 35, which is 65% below the league average line. You could really have put together a pretty strong case for him as the worst hitter in baseball. Not making any hard contact, putting the ball on the ground an overwhelming amount. He had the lowest line drive rate of any qualified hitter at the time that he was demoted. Just really kind of looked lost at the plate. And he's got one of the highest rates of swinging at pitches outside of the strike zone in the big leagues, and his swinging strike rate was right up there as well. And this is just a guy who wasn't contributing offensively. And, even with how strong he is on defense, the negative offensive contributions were outweighing it to a point. And the organization felt that it was the right move to put him down in AAA and get him out of the spotlight and let him, maybe work in a less pressure-filled environment to see if he can kind of get back on track that way. Well, at the same time, they wanted to give a little bit longer of a look to player Tyler Saladino, who they acquired just in like a minor trade for cash considerations with the White Sox a little earlier this season after one of their top prospects, Mauricio Dubon, who would probably be playing shortstop right now, but he tore his ACL in a AAA game in April. So Saladino came up and he hit close to 500 for the first week worth of plate appearances that he got, so they figured they would give him a little bit longer leash, and he's been playing pretty well so far. He's actually starting at shortstop today. The lineup came out a little bit earlier, it looks like, so he's looked pretty strong on offense. I don't think he's going to keep up his pace currently, but if he can be even like a league average bat, that would be quite a significant improvement over what Arcia was providing. And he's not a bad defensive shortstop either, and came up as a shortstop in the minor leagues and has put together some pretty good fielding numbers at that position throughout his career. So obviously somebody that the organization likes. I guess it's worth remembering that Arcia isn't a player that the David Stearns regime went out and got. They inherited him from the previous regime, so there's always that little bit of kind of bureaucratic stuff, politics even in the workplace, even in baseball. But I guess I don't expect this to be a super long demotion for Arcia, as long as he can kind of get his bat back a little bit on track. I just think it's for the time being, it's probably more so of a riding the hot hand situation with Saladino and seeing if Arcia can kind of bounce back a little bit against a less pressure-filled environment.
And those top prospect expectations can be just brutal on some guys who come up and don't live up to that instantly.
Yeah.
Graham followed up with another very pointed question, because that's what Graham does. His second question was, why haven't they traded Keon Broxton yet?
Well, coming into the season, the Brewers' biggest thing was all this depth that they had. And obviously a big part of that was in the outfield, and the big question was how are they going to work all these outfielders and this and that. And so far in the season, Christian Yelich has already been on the disabled list. Ryan Braun's been on the disabled list twice. They haven't really had any issues finding playing time for any of these guys. And there's been opportunities for Keon Broxton to, have come up to the major league level. They've opted to go with Brett Phillips for those few opportunities instead. But I think that is more so of a performance situation, in as much as Keon Broxton really isn't lighting the world on fire right now down in AAA. And playing in Colorado Springs, that's obviously one of the most friendly offensive environments in all of baseball, let alone minor league baseball. And I want to say he's got just right around a league average slash line, maybe a little bit less. He's still striking out in 35-40% of his plate appearances, which was always the biggest bugaboo with him. And I mean, if Lorenzo Cain, for whatever reason, were to go on an extended disabled list stint this year, I think that Keon Broxton would probably be the guy that they would call up in that situation as a right-handed bat and a true center fielder. But for the time being, he hasn't really forced the issue, so it hasn't really come up at all. And I don't know that you're going to deal a guy like that for anything of note that would make it more worthwhile than just holding on to him for the time being, at least from the organization's standpoint.
Sure. The challenge, I think, when you have this area of depth, whether it's outfield or pitching or whatever it is trying to figure out how to make all of those pieces beneficial, even if they're not all at the major league level at the same time. The Cardinals have been in a similar situation. In fact, with outfielders, there are too many outfielders for not enough spots, and you just try to move them all in and out as you can. And you don't want to trade them off just because you have them, because you want to create value in return as well. Offensively, we've mentioned that this Brewers team has really finally started clicking. A number of guys have been contributing to that all up and down the lineup. You mentioned Lorenzo Cain. Pretty solid start to that lineup. One question, though, was actually about Jesus Aguilar. And the question is, with his play lately, do you think he gets more playing time than Thames when Thames is back from the DL?
I certainly think it'll be interesting to see how they kind of divvy that all up. Obviously, Jesus Aguilar has been sort of a revelation at first base for them this year. And I mean, he was good last year, but it didn't look exactly like the way that he succeeded last year was going to be sustainable. He had, a 30+% strikeout rate, and he's a bigger, bulkier guy, not very fast, and somehow was still able to produce a 340 batting average on balls in play. So I guess I wasn't very high on him coming into the season, but he's exceeded all of my expectations. He has drastically cut down on his strikeout rate without sacrificing any of his power or his walk ability, and is still putting the ball in play at a very high rate. He's got over a 300 batting average right now, which I certainly didn't see coming. And the prodigious power, and he's been tearing the cover off the ball this month. And it's interesting because Eric Thames at the same time was hitting extremely well when he went on the disabled list as well. He's got over a 970 OPS on the season as well. Had 7 home runs through his first 22 games before he tore that ligament in his thumb. And Craig Counsell is the manager who he'll find playing time for everybody, and he's not afraid to kind of think outside the box in ways to get guys playing time. And Eric Thames played some outfield last year, and I'm sure that they'll consider giving him some playing time in the outfield this season to get his left-handed bat in the lineup. And Jesus Aguilar has been a first baseman for the large majority of his career and started a game at third base earlier this season for the Brewers. So I guess there's some modicum of positional flexibility there too. So, I mean, there'll be plenty of ways that they'll figure out to get these guys different at-bats in the lineup and play the hot hand. And I think a lot of it will be matchup based, and I think we'll probably see Eric Thames get a lot of playing time against right-handed hitters. But I'm sure that they'll figure out a way to get Aguilar in there pretty regularly too.
Now, I did say we would circle back to pitching. Let's talk a little bit about the matchups for this series. Game 1 will be Luke Weaver against Brent the Raptor Suter, which we discussed last time. Then Michael Wacha against Zach Davies, who has had one start, I think, since returning from the DL. And then that third game, I think, is what will draw everyone's attention, assuming you actually have Facebook and can watch the game, because it'll be Alex Reyes against Junior Guerra, who made his first start against the Cardinals, and we talked a lot about him, and you've kind of claimed him, I believe. But this
Yeah.
Alex Reyes versus Junior Guerra game should be very interesting. One Twitter question came from Joe over at Birds on the Black, and he said, "Will the entire lineup ask counsel for Wednesday off because Alex Reyes?"
Geez, boy, I wouldn't be surprised. And Alex Reyes is somebody that I've personally been following pretty closely for the last few years. I'm in one of those. I'm not big into like fantasy sports or anything like that, but I've been doing it's like a dynasty league fantasy baseball thing for the last 4 seasons. And the first year I drafted Alex Reyes and have had him kind of stashed on my minor league list and on the disabled list for the last 2 years, just kind of eagerly anticipating when he's going to come back from this surgery. And, what is it, 23 scoreless innings with 44 strikeouts over his rehab assignment? Like, oh my gosh.
I mean,
so I'm like I said, I'm invested in seeing how this guy is going to do. And I think that, it'll obviously be a really exciting game to watch on Wednesday. I do have Facebook. I haven't watched any of the Facebook broadcasts yet because I think the only reason I really have Facebook is to share my Brew Crew Ball stuff on their admin page. I really try and avoid that website. But and Junior Guerra's the Brewers staff leader by earned run average right now. Been a guy that I've kind of made a lot of my bones on the last couple of years, so it's been really encouraging for me to see him come up and be so successful so far. And I guess I can't think of a different pitching matchup I'd rather watch on Wednesday. That's for sure.
Yeah, if you like pitching, that will be the game to watch. If you like offense, maybe not so much. Pick a different game to watch. One of the other two earlier in the series. We'll see what happens there.
I guess if neither Brent Suter nor Zach Davies have been exactly great this season, so there's a chance that we'll see some offense at least on the Cardinals side the next couple of days. Zach Davies, his last time out off the disabled list, only went 4 innings. I want to say he gave up 4 or 5 earned runs, and he was pretty disappointed with the way that he pitched after the game. And he hasn't been quite as sharp this season as he was last year. Was one of the best pitchers on the staff last year. Ended the season with his second consecutive sub-4 ERA. But just kind of seems to have struggled to get going a little bit this series. I guess historically been a little bit of a slow starter, and he's a very command-focused pitcher, so sometimes it takes pitchers a little bit longer of those kinds to get locked in as the season goes on. So I'm sure that stint on the disabled list didn't help, kind of sidelining him for about 3 or 4 weeks with some rotator cuff inflammation. So it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully he can, at least hopefully for us, he can bounce back, in his start this week. But I guess it'll be something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and the back-to-back starts from Weaver and Waka are interesting for Cardinals fans right now because Carlos Martinez is still on the DL. With Alex Reyes coming back, when Martinez comes back, someone's going to be the odd man out of a rotation that has been pretty extraordinary so far. Luke Weaver had a couple of rough weeks in the middle there, but he's been pretty good outside of that. And Michael Wacha has kind of been sneaky good this year, just very quietly doing his thing, going out every 5 days. I think because of the nature of his injury a couple of years ago, there are always some concerns about that, but he's just very quietly gone about his business and put the Cardinals in a position to win every time out. So it almost feels like both of these guys are kind of pitching for their spot in the rotation, which I don't know that that's fair to either one of them based on the success they've had so far this season, but one of them is likely going to be the odd man out, and I don't know that it adds any pressure to their starts this week, but it definitely brings a few more eyes to what they're doing and how they're going about doing it, and how they could provide value in maybe a different way. So 3 very interesting games, I think, this week in a National League Central race that I think will continue to be interesting for a lot of this season. Now, this last question came from Twitter. Quite simply says, roof open or closed? Now, I asked for some clarification, what the context of that is, where we're going with this, and he basically said, you choose. So this is a choose your own adventure question. Roof open or closed?
Well, with the heat wave that we've had here these last couple of days, when that roof is closed inside of Miller Park and it's this hot outside and can feel a little bit like a sauna inside of there, so I'm gonna go roof open for this one.
Solid choice. I like the direction you went with that very unclear question. So thanks, Jeff, for the choose your own adventure.
Ball flies a little better when the roof is open too, so always fun to see some dingers get out there.
There you go. There you go. The Cardinals offense has not had a whole lot of those lately, although I think there are a few guys on this Cardinals roster that seem to like hitting in Milwaukee. So I don't know. We'll see what happens there. But Kyle, anyway, thanks for joining me again today. I think these two teams are going to be going at it pretty closely for a lot of the season, and this should be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Always appreciate you reaching out and appreciate the opportunity to come on. And, like you said, I'm sure it's going to be a close race all season. We got a lot of good teams here in the NL Central. I guess it's probably the best division in baseball right now. So be a lot of fun to watch.
Well, maybe more to talk about the next time around, and we'll see what happens this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great.
Both of these teams are coming off of come-from-behind wins to close out their last series. The Brewers with the Mets, the Cardinals with the Pirates. But as much as you would like to think that would create some momentum, we all know that's not really how baseball works. How baseball does work, though, is that by Memorial Day, you start looking at the standings a little bit closer. And if you don't believe that the players are scoreboard watching already, well, just go see what Joe Treza said about the Cardinals watching the conclusion of the Brewers game in the clubhouse in St. Louis before they got on the plane to head to Milwaukee. They know that these games matter. They know where they stand in the race toward the postseason. And these are two teams right now at the top of the division who are both trying to reclaim their place in the postseason baseball scene. A lot can change before then, but they could do themselves a favor by playing well this week against this NL Central rival. Thanks again to Kyle for joining me. I hope you all have had a lovely holiday weekend. Many thanks to the families of the men and women of our armed forces, and especially those who have paid the ultimate price. Our thanks, our gratitude, our love, all to you this week and every week. I'm Tara Wellman. I'll see you next time.